We are going to listen to Citizen Power from the irrelevant to pride in museums. We have Rob Lewis from the Birmingham Museums Trust and Lucy Reed from Democracy Next. If you could show them a warm welcome, please.
Good afternoon, thank you. Can I check you can hear me okay? Brilliant, thank you. My name's Rob Lewis. I'm Director of Transformation at Birmingham Museums Trust. And if you think that title's fancy, I'm joined by Lucy Reed, who's Chief Strategy and Creative Officer at Democracy Next, who I refer to as our Citizens Jury Whisperer during this process. I'm also going to acknowledge here the funding that we received from National Lottery Heritage Fund, who enabled this work and the wider programme of activity that this was part of. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the Citizens Jury that was delivered in Birmingham between September and January, and we're going to give a few perspectives on this. Lucy's going to speak more broadly about juries and assemblies in the wider context outside of Birmingham Museums Trust, and then I'll give an overview of how this unfolded internally. And then we'll finally play the documentary video that summarises the range of voices that were involved, particularly those of the jurors. On that, I kind of want to acknowledge that we're speaking here as representatives. This was a large team effort of both internal staff as well as Shared Futures, who were the facilitators who delivered the jury, but primarily I want to acknowledge the 26 jurors who are ultimately at the heart of this. I'm not going to name them individually, but I really want to acknowledge the fact that the success of this process was down to their engagement and enthusiasm. Internally, we do try wherever possible to talk about the jury publicly with the jurors present, but it's not possible for this talk, so I'm hoping the video will allow you to hear at least some of their voices. I'll now hand over to Lucy for a quick primer on the process itself.
Thanks, Rob. Just check you can all hear me as well. Great, thank you. Hello, yes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Citizens Jury. So first off, I'm just going to tell you who we are and the kind of work that we do, and then I'll give you a kind of short introduction. So I am part of Democracy Next. We are an international research and action institute focused on scaling high-quality, permanent and empowered citizens' assemblies. So our mission is to shift who has power and how we take decisions in government and other institutions of daily life. So we create tools, we research, we write, we work directly with cities, with governments, financial institutions, co-ops, museums, to create the infrastructure and the capacity for more people in more places to know how to go about setting up and running a permanent citizens' assembly. So what is a citizens' assembly? So, citizens' assemblies are structured spaces for creative problem solving. They're also known as citizens' juries or mini-publics, and they're part of what's known as deliberative democracy, which is distinctive from representative democracy, which is all about voting and elections, and that's what the majority of people know and understand by the term democracy. But in fact, the roots of the word democracy come from demos, people, and kratos, power, which means rule by the people, as opposed to rule by politicians, which is the definition we usually know. So there are three kind of like what I like to call magic ingredients of a citizens' assembly. So the first one is sortition, which is selection by lottery of a group of people who are representative of the local population. The second is deliberation. So that is about how people come together to listen, to learn together, to weigh up evidence, to learn from experts, including those with lived or personal experience of the issue that's being discussed, and work to find common ground. And the recommendations that make the cut are agreed by supermajority. So usually 75 to 85% of people need to agree for a recommendation to make the cut. People receive payments or vouchers for their time, childcare costs are covered, travel, digital support if needed. And then the third element is rotation. So that is we take it in turns to represent and to be represented. And the purpose is that there is enough time in a citizens' assembly to engage with complexity, exercise collective intelligence, and to find common ground. There's a wealth of evidence around these processes and how they work. This is based on OECD research, which was created by actually DemNext's founding team on assemblies. So it's known as the global deliberative wave. Basically, to set this work in an international context, there are more than 700 of these types of processes that have now been counted all around the world. And there's a set of best practice principles for how these assemblies should run. And the purpose of these is to ensure that each assembly is high quality And the reason why that's important is transparency, trust building, and legitimacy of the process. So what I'm going to do now, you can have a little look at those. So time is one, integrity, evaluation, all of those sorts of things that really make sure that the process is legitimate and is not subject to kind of capture. So I'm going to show you now a 2-minute video from Art O'Leary from Ireland. Now, if you know anything about citizens' assemblies, Ireland is one of the most well-known models of permanent citizens' assemblies. And in Ireland, the assemblies that have taken place there have changed the law on kind of complex and difficult issues like women's rights and abortion and on same-sex marriage. So the changes in law in Ireland were directly as a result of citizens' assemblies. This little video is about 2 minutes.
There is something going on in the world right now. There is a hunger across the globe in political systems to get citizens involved in decision-making and policy development. And citizens want to be involved in this role as well. I'm going to tell you a story about Ireland and its experience with citizens' assemblies.
The level of inclusion and support to people to give their opinions and their values and to share that and for it to be considered and not shot down has been absolutely amazing.
The 100 people that you have in the room have to be representative of your society, all of it.
With the diversity, I've met so many people that I would never have come into my zone before, unless it was in this environment, and it's really fantastic.
Everyone in our country can look into that room and say, I'm there, I'm represented there, that's me.
It's 100 real people, and I really do believe we've represented our country and our future generations really well.
We expose them to enough information and perspectives that they develop an expertise in the subject.
The information you've given me has changed how I see things and how I go about my day, so I'm really thankful for that.
And at the end of that process, then we ask them the question, what will we do about the issue of women's health? So the citizens recommended an abortion regime which was much more liberal than the government had expected. And they said, oh, let's see. So the citizens in the room, they voted 67 to 33 for this women's health regime.
I found that we were able to say things that perhaps civil servants couldn't say.
When the question was put to the people of Ireland in a referendum, the result was 66 to 34, which proves two things. One is that room was perfectly representative of the Irish people. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the Irish people were much more advanced in their thinking on this particular subject than the politicians were.
So that just gives you a little bit of insight into how it works in a government context. I'm just going to take you a little bit deeper on the sortition process, which is the process of how people get to be in the room, because I think in the culture sector, this is particularly where we do a lot of participation, right, in the cultural sector. So I think this is particularly interesting, how you get the representative group in the room. So there's a 2-stage lottery process. So in the first stage, a number of invitations, a lot, are sent out all around, let's call it Birmingham in this instance. And people who receive that invitation can vote, can opt in to be part of the process. Then there is a second stage process that takes place, which is called stratification, which is of those people who've put their hands up and said yes, then a group is brought together who are representative of that community. So they are stratified by a series of kind of sortition criteria: age, gender, education level. There's a whole bunch of them. Rob will tell you about Birmingham's in a little bit. And then the citizens spend enough time. It's usually 4 to 6 days as a minimum, and that's one of the key things, is there has to be enough time for people to spend together to get to understand the issue. It's usually over a period of months. There might be some online sessions as well. And then the types of questions that a citizens' assembly might tackle, they're usually difficult ones. So they might be values-based dilemmas, complex problems that require trade-offs, or longer-term questions. And the majority of assemblies, they kind of deal with a lot of stuff like planning and infrastructure kind of stuff. So there've been a lot on climate, strategic planning, health, all of those sorts of things. But if you look a little further down the list, you'll spot culture is down there as well. So there have been a number of assemblies that have been documented through this process on culture. There are 4 examples that you can look up if you'd like to find more about. So the first 2 assemblies and museums were in Germany, in Bonn and Dresden. If you're familiar with the New Art Exchange in Nottingham, you might know that they have recently introduced the Voice Assembly, which is going to be a 3rd pillar of their governance, and then Birmingham. So now I will pass to Rob.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to take a step back now and look at what this means in context and why it was undertaken. I'm going to start with who we are. So Birmingham Museums Trust, we're a charitable trust set up in 2014 to manage the buildings and collections on behalf of Birmingham City Council. That's 9 buildings, 1 million objects. As well as the 2 largest sites, that's Birmingham Museums and Art Gallery and Think Tank Science Centre. We've got an off-site collection centre, and we've got 6 community museums distributed reasonably across the geography of Birmingham. We're substantially funded by Birmingham City Council, that's about 50% of our income, with further additional funding from Arts Council England, another 10%. We're a national portfolio organisation. And so, familiar to a lot of you, almost all of that context brings challenges. Funding's effectively decreased since the Trust was set up in 2014, while costs have increased. Visitor numbers for the last few years are significantly lower than they were pre-pandemic. We're in Birmingham, and so the City Council declared itself effectively bankrupt in the year immediately prior to us convincing the jury. So the local funding landscape is even more challenging. And those 9 sites that I mentioned in various states of condition. Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery had to remain closed after the pandemic because a major rewiring project had to have it completely decanted without the funding to refurbish and reinstate it, although we have been slowly clawing our way back open. A lot of those smaller sites have remained completely closed, and even those that have remained open are in some level of structural disrepair and have even more of a challenge to get the audiences back. So the picture's been pretty bleak, and we recognise that we need to make some difficult decisions. I will point out here, though, that the Citizens Jury was not a panacea. We recognise that for some of these problems, there's a fundamental problem of funding that the jury process in of itself won't solve. However, we did recognise that we did need a plan to move forward, and we needed that plan to be informed by our community and be shaped by them. We also need to make sure that our reason for existing was something that our community needed, not something that we just assumed for them. And so with funding from the Heritage Fund, we put together a programme to develop that longer-term plan that would see us become sustainable and move more clearly towards the vision for the organisation, but one that was informed by community need. Then that community need would be informed by a jury. And so to that end, as well as appointing Shared Future, who delivered the jury itself, and Lucy Reed, we appointed an oversight panel who would ensure the sound delivery of the jury. This panel included representatives of the museum, our board, the City Council, that's both councillors and council officers, funders, local partners, and experts in deliberative processes. Their role was to guide where appropriate, decide when appropriate, as the process unfolded, taking us from the initial question, how we would choose our participants, to what kind of commentators the participants would hear from. And their first decision was the question. Our jury were going to need to be given a question which was going to be the basis for their deliberations, and in answer to which they would make their recommendations. It's here I'm going to first acknowledge the very steep learning curve that we had as the commissioning organisation and the support that we had from Lucy in guiding us through that process. We didn't know what we didn't know. We knew that the Citizens Jury was a tool we felt could be useful, and it was in line with our goal to make Birmingham Museums a more democratic organisation, but it was the practicalities of the process that was new to us. So this question, what does Birmingham need and want from its museums now and in the future? And what should Birmingham Museums Trust do to make these things happen? It wasn't the question that we had in mind when we started this process. We kind of knew the outcome that we were looking for. We were looking for a question that was going to guide us in shaping what that plan would look like for us going forward, and to some extent was going to help validate or otherwise our direction of being a more community-led and democratic institution. But it was through workshopping with Lucy and then reviewing with the oversight panel that we were able to land on the question that would ultimately shape the process. And so next we needed people. And our decision was going to be who those people were going to be. This was our first attempt at a jury, and it was the first in the UK in a museum context, so we knew we were looking in jury territory rather than a larger assembly, and looking at around 25 individuals. This is a pilot for us. We knew we were going to have to be pragmatic as to how we approach this. So it's worth pointing out here, as the oversight panel did point out to us, Birmingham's a large and massively diverse city. The aim of selecting participants is that they match the population of Birmingham as closely as possible. It's a population of over 1 million with a super diverse population, and we knew we were never able to fully reflect the total diversity of Birmingham. But the aim was, if you walked into that room with the jurors, you would feel like you're in Birmingham. You would feel like maybe you're in New Street Station or the Bullring. And so we picked demographics that would try to give us that, seeking a good geographic spread across the city, as well as representative proportions in the jury of gender, age, disability, education, religion, and LGBTQIA+ identity. And so the respondents to our 5,000 invitations that went out across the city were analysed by the Sortition Foundation to produce a sample, in effect our jury, that was broadly reflective of the population of the Birmingham for those demographic criteria. I will point out that one of the ones that was key for us was education, because of the direct correlation between museum visitorship and education level. Unfortunately, we did receive a very, very low response rate from those with lower levels of educational achievement, and we had been trying to over-index on that so we could engage directly with non-visitors. I would say on this, and there's no real way of testing it, one of the questions that we talked about informally during the process was that word museum in the question. It kind of needs to be there because this jury is fundamentally about a museum, but it kind of seems plausible that if you're an avid museum avoider and you get an envelope through your door that says the word museum in it, you're probably not going to get much further than reading the question. So there's probably a question for us going forward as to how easily we can engage non-visitors in a process like this. But people our jury we did. And it's worth noting that Shared Future actually over-recruited in their selection in anticipation of there being dropouts. So we started the process with 28 jurors, but at the end we actually only lost 2 jurors, and that was to the very end of the process, both for legitimate reasons, and we retained 26 throughout. This was a very engaged jury. And they went through 30 hours of facilitated deliberation about that question, hearing from a range of internal and external commentators who spoke to the themes from finance, the roles of museums in society, the development of exhibitions, and so on. Key here is that while we as the museum might have proposed the names of commentators, it's the jury themselves that asked what they wanted to hear about. We didn't propose those themes to them. And so a large number of emails went out, possibly to some of you in this room, along the lines of, our jury may want to hear from you, they may not. Are you free? And I think it's a testament to the interest in this process, quite how many colleagues were prepared to step forward and take part in this process. And what was also particularly valuable was being able to have a small number of observers who could attend. This meant we could bring in funders, so the Heritage Fund, the CMS, the City Council, to get their support in this process as it was unfolding and in what we were trying to do through it. And what we started to see was change and a growing understanding in the jury. I will say that C was at a distance. As the commissioning body, we, those from Birmingham Museums Trust, were sort of kept to one side, so the jurors felt free to talk openly. But to put this in context, in the first session, the jurors were asked to stand on a virtual scale to indicate the relevance of Birmingham museums to their lives, effectively, with the vast majority of them very clearly on the they're really irrelevant to me side of things. But what was clear as that kind of process unfolded was that really deep engagement and learning that was starting to shift that position in their minds. And a lot of that was down undoubtedly to the quality of the facilitation that they were able to take part in, which brought the jurors into that conversation. In that first session, as they were coming in the door, they were very unsure, very apprehensive, standing separately, not quite knowing what they were there for. Take that forward to just last Saturday when we brought them back together in the collection centre. The thing that they were most happy about was being back together again. And it was the first time that actually I was able to speak to them directly, and they were quite comfortable challenging, asking questions. They'd been on a journey. Now, those outcomes in terms of impact are not insubstantial, but there's obviously also a tangible output in terms of the recommendations that the jurors made. At the close of the jury process, so this is in December, they decided on a number of roles for the museum, 10 of them, the kind of museum they wanted us to be, as well as recommendations, just about 21. So the things that we should do to become that museum. They're all on the website, so I've really just sort of hyper-summarised them here. And again, the categorisation was theirs, but they felt strongly, for example, about new audiences and how we should go about that. There was a really strong recommendation about music, which surprised all of us, but that was actually validated by some independent market research we were doing at the same time. Community engagement was important to them. They saw the value of museums as civic spaces and wanted us to meet them where they were, and they argued very strongly for the ongoing embedding of community decision-making in both forms, both generally and really specifically with regard to exhibitions. They were very keen on diverse perspectives, with the role of museums in telling diverse stories. But they did recognise the position that we were in financially. They saw the need for diversifying income through promotion and sponsorship, as well as the branding of ourselves, how we were speaking to Birmingham. As well as their recommendations, the report also includes this statement, which they wrote and agreed collectively. I'm very loath to take their words and speak for them. The statement's much longer than this, so I've just given a very, very small part of it for you to have a look at, but I would really invite you to download the report and read it all. I mentioned the impact of the jurors earlier, and I should flag the impact of those of us who are involved in the process. This was the point, the reading of the statement, where I think those of us from Birmingham Museums who were in the room all broke down into tears. Seeing the impact this process had on those jurors was immediately emotionally impactful. It's had an impact both on the jurors but us in terms of our understanding of this process and what it means for us. A couple of months or so after the final deliberation, so this is taking us to the end of January, start of February, those recommendations were shared publicly at a launch event. I'm very keen to say here that we didn't share them publicly. This was the time for the jurors. One of the most joyful aspects of this process was that the jurors developed and delivered this launch event themselves. We provided the venue, we provided the catering, they provided and delivered the content. And they delivered it with incredible confidence and conviction, and they did that to a group of invited stakeholders, of museum staff, funders, and local partners. And then engaged in direct conversation with them, advocating for the recommendations they'd made and for the museum they'd become advocates for. Rachel, who you can see there, was emceeing the event. She's the one on the lectern, ended with very stern but very confident, "These are our words." The jurors wanted to take real ownership of the work that they had done. I would say the launch event was also filmed, and there is a short film of that launch event that we'll release shortly as well. But for now, I'm very pleased to share the short film of the process itself. This is about 7 minutes, and I hope you enjoy.
It's nice to have a say in what's happening in the city.
I'm hoping we can make a positive change for Birmingham.
It's nice to be a part of something like this and feel like we're being listened to.
We can make a little bit of a contribution to the solution. It's important we get that right.
I talk to other museum directors about what we're doing, and I can see a look in their eye. Really? I wouldn't do that in a million years. You're Birmingham residents, this is your museum, your collection.
You decide on the displays.
I would say the short answer is we do. We do decide.
The sessions just followed a nice structure where it just starts from the people, ground up, builds up to what we want from the museums.
The regular people are going to be the people that come here, so it's really important that they have a space to voice things that they don't like, and probably more importantly things that they do like and want to see more of, so that we can tailor the experience and then just get more people through the doors.
We think that the museums deserve to be busier and better, and this is one of our first attempts at doing that. So we sent out invitations to 5,000 people, and through a process called sortition, we ended up selecting 25 people who represent different demographics of the city to really genuinely find out what people think about museums.
The core part of a citizens jury is that we aim to be representative in the sample of people who come into the room, and a jury is also an extended process, so it lasts over weeks, months even, not just one day, one afternoon.
We've done a lot of thinking about what might come out of the citizens jury, but we just don't know. There's kind of everything to play for here. People could tell us if they want something completely different. They can tell us where our focus should be. They could tell us what they don't like. And so I just don't know what to expect, which is exciting and slightly terrifying.
Well, it's not like a criminal jury. It is a coming together of people from across the city, from all different backgrounds, ages, walks of life, who are asked to answer very difficult questions about the future of the museums and art galleries in Birmingham.
It hasn't quite sunk in yet that it's a very, very prestigious thing that we're doing, which I'm very proud to be a part of.
I feel I have a sense of responsibility. I have an opportunity to give my view, my opinion.
I thought it would just be easy, just be a bunch of questions. How do we get people through the door?
Do we charge them to come through the door? What age group are we looking at? But it's actually a lot more complex right across the board. So you're looking at finances, you're looking at diversity, you're looking at backgrounds, you're looking at the history. It is a much bigger, complex picture than I thought it would be.
We were also talking about user experience at one point, like you're just thinking about someone going in from how they get to the museum, how they hear about the museum, to their experience in the museum, and the end result as well.
What I've learned over these past few sessions is how when you get a cross-section of people and you give them a problem to solve, you get so many really interesting different perspectives and common sense as well.
It's been really interesting. We've had lots of talks, lots of information coming at us, and there've been healthy debates.
You can tell that they really listen to what you're saying, because you will go home from one session and then you will arrive at the next session and you kind of look at the recommendations and the notes that have been written up and you think, oh yeah, I said that, like they were literally my words.
It's very important, I think, to be listened to in terms of the changes, because it's part of the city I live in. So I do think it's important to have a say in what happens in Birmingham museums and maybe hopefully other venues in Birmingham as well.
It's having your voice, and it's having your voice here. And your voice is important.
The thing that's special about it is the citizens have agency. So when you're doing a citizens' assembly, what you want is the commissioning organisation to have signed up in advance to, at very least, responding to or acting on the recommendations made by the citizens.
My biggest fear, as with any citizens jury, is the recommendations are not respected. They're not taken seriously. People are used as props. I expect a serious account from Sarah and Zach in terms of which recommendations they can carry with them forward. And I think that is really part of the essence of what it means to democratize museums, right? For decision makers to be accountable to the people they want to come to the museum.
Sometimes we're too safe in the museum business. We're taught and trained to conserve objects for future generations. So we're cautious as a profession. But actually, if you don't take the risks, then things will happen to the organisation, to the people that you're supposed to serve.
There's just optimism and opportunity at a time that's really difficult for us. I mean, we're doing this against a very challenging context, a very challenging backdrop. But that's people who have come together, giving up their time on a Saturday, willing to make change, working with us to make that change, and it just feels full of potential and possibility.
I'm someone who hasn't really been to the museums much, kind of not really been on my radar, but it's been interesting to get to learn a lot more about them and kind of have that open up in my mind a little bit.
Like growing up as a child, it was never anything that my family would do, bring us into town, go into museums and things like that. It just wasn't something we were interested in. It's made me feel that actually it's accessible to go into a museum when you don't know nothing about what's in there and just have an interest in it or take an interest.
Feels great. I've told my daughters about it and they don't understand, and I turned and said, well, we're shaping the future of Birmingham Museums.
I hope that it can build a bridge between the museum and communities. I'm proud. It's a lot of responsibility, but I'm happy that I've been part of this process.
I feel more involved. More involved. I feel as if I'm part of Birmingham now. And it's taken me all this time to feel part of Birmingham. So for that, thanks.
I can just about watch that film now without getting choked up. Since that process has concluded, we've now offered a further period of 18 months where we're seeking to engage with the jurors further. And in that time, what our aim is to kind of work with them on understanding the recommendations, as well as more formally reporting to them on the progress against them. Outside of that process, the recommendations have directly impacted the 5-year plan that we now have in place for the organisation. We'll be doing an exhibition on the jury that we'll be developing with them. We're inviting them to speak at the MA conference with us later this year. And then this photo is from last Saturday. So this is that visit to the collection centre I mentioned, where we started that process of working together. I'll now give back to Lucy just to close with a little of the evaluation of the process that was commissioned.
Thanks, Rob. So you've seen some of the impacts, but we all like a few numbers. So the evaluation is in the process of being prepared at the moment. So this just is really a little sneak preview of some of the findings that are emerging. So what do citizens think about museums? So 59% of jury members felt that being part of this citizens' jury has made me change my perspective about museums, with 100% saying that they wanted to visit one of BMT's sites over the next 12 months. It was 40% at the start of the process. These are public spaces that belong to the people. I didn't think of museums in this way before. And then on the process itself, so none of the jurors had ever heard of a citizens' jury or a citizens' assembly before, and 82% strongly agreed, with the rest agreeing, so that's 100% agreement. Being part of this citizens' jury has made me more likely to engage in other processes of citizen participation and democratic decision-making. We know from all of the research that this is one of the outputs of a citizens' jury, is the museum is going to have very engaged citizens who want to stay involved. And we know that it brings about a sense of civic responsibility and a real interest in democracy from the participants. So the first survey that was sent out at the beginning of the jury showed that 42% of the jury members scored an 8 to 10 on feeling empowered, so where 10 is feeling fully empowered. By the end of the process, 100% scored an 8 to 10 on feeling empowered, with 53% of them scoring it 10 out of 10 for feeling fully empowered. I've never felt part of anything, to be honest with you. And I've certainly not felt part of any democratic process. So I think this citizens' jury has given me that. In fact, I know it. It's given me a better outlook on life. And finally, just to go back to where we began thinking about pride, 94% of the jury members in the final survey felt that being part of this citizens' jury has made me proud. That was the top response of the options for how jurors might feel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, sorry, wrong microphone. Thank you very much. That was really good. Are there any questions, please? Could you raise your hands?
Hiya, thank you. That was great. Really interesting. How did you, or going into the process, did you already have buy-in from everyone senior across the organisation? Or how difficult was it to get that buy-in to actually do something about what people recommended out the other end?
Within the senior leadership team, yes. There was pretty sort of consensus around doing this. I think there wasn't not buy-in from the board. I think what there was a lack of understanding at board level. So even though we presented to the board on the process of the citizens' jury, I think it took longer for it to sink in, and probably not until actually the launch event for that to happen. So, the exec on board, but I think the board took a little bit longer. I think one of the things that they were trying to unpick is what this actually meant for our governance structure, because effectively this was another sort of decision-making body, and I think that was the thing that they were more concerned on rather than in anything else.
Just to add a little note that I think the thing that is also people, when you're commissioning a citizens' jury, it's the transfer of power that also people need to really get their head around. So if Zach and Sarah had said, which they didn't, yeah, we'll take a look and we'll cherry pick the ones we want, that's the risk of these. So that's why it's really important to work up front with the decision makers, that everybody really does understand that this isn't a participation process where the museum still decides. The whole thing is about how you transfer power. So that's the thing that we all needed to get a good understanding of up front, I think, which BMT did, just to note.
Okay, your very last chance to ask the last question. Oh no, 2 last questions. Oh, just here.
Thank you very, very much. That was really interesting and very inspirational. I was just wondering, it's a bit of an open question, but what advice would you give to cultural institutions that are maybe seeking out more of that, not input necessarily, but like that collaborative democratization dynamic? What advice would you give?
I think one of the challenges I found in this process was museums are very hierarchical. And everything is not in silos, but in silos. And Birmingham's a big organisation, and we're a bit like that. And I think it's very easy for for engagement processes to sit with a particular department. And I think this was led by me under transformation, and that was for a reason. It needed to be kind of cross-departmental. But we didn't get enough of the organisation involved. And I look back that now, really regretting that. It was a lot of kind of competing priorities, but I think I would encourage anyone who's looking at a process like this, it needs to cut across the entire organisation, not just sit within a specific department where it sort of gets siloed and just sort of constrains its impact. I think that would be my bit of advice.
It's a really, really good question. I think the other thing, citizens' juries, they're not cheap. So you can't, just pop one in your budget for 10k and hope for the best. They need proper investment, and they need investment of time as well. I think what you can do, though, is you can learn about them, and you can learn about the principles that sit underneath them. So sortition processes in an organisation, if you have a staff council, you could have a sortition process for, who sits on your council, and with rotation, and thinking about the principles of deliberation. So even though not everybody can do or can sort of plan to afford to do a citizens' assembly, you can look at the elements that make it up and start to think about how those could become part of other practices and sit within that sort of general sphere of participation and participatory practices, I would say, as well. So have a good read. There's lots of good stuff to read.
Okay, our final question.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really, really inspiring. I was wondering how, beyond ongoing communications with the jurors, you were going to be communicating to the rest of your audiences in Birmingham that this has happened. Is there a visual identity of, I saw the recommendation for bringing collections to communities, and I'm thinking of a lending handling collection box that says you chose it, we've done it kind of logo. What are your plans for that?
I mean, firstly, I like that. I'm going to steal it. I guess more immediately, so the recommendations are directly in that activity plan I mentioned, that 5-year plan for the organisation, and I would say the Citizens Jury statement is the first thing that you read when you look at that. So anyone who looks at that plan, the first thing they're going to read is the statement. Beyond that, I mentioned the exhibition that we're doing. So all of our visitors to BMAG, the Museum and Art Gallery, it will be right there front and centre, co-curated with those jurors. So we'll try to tell that story as widely as we possibly can. The video's obviously been shared. That's been shared with the City Council who are replaying it. We're literally talking and talking and talking about this as much as we possibly can do, and that's hopefully how we'll get the message out, not just to our communities in Birmingham, but wider than that as well. If you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, this will go out through all the sort of deliberative democracy people as well. They're like museum people, they're like a little special group. But I think the other important thing that, just to add, is the transparency. So a lot of stuff is on BMT's website, all of the speaker talks, the recommendations, and that's really important because ultimately the accountability and transparency of the process is one of the things that makes it distinctive. So that was just to add to that. Oh, you've got another one. He's got another one.
Afterthought. The other thing I would say is actually the jurors themselves have been phenomenal. In terms of this idea of they become advocates of the museum, they really have done. They're out there, they're talking to their peers, they're emailing the council directly on our behalf. So they have become advocates, ambassadors now for that service, and that's doing probably a lot more actually to some extent than we do because their voice carries more weight. There's no sense of sort of agenda or bias because they are Birmingham.
Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing so much with us.